undoubtedly the DC Extended Universe finally being laid to rest, yet not before spawning a myriad of films ranging from deviously abhorrent to mildly amusing, was an event to be celebrated for fans of superhero media across the globe. But now, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the DCU is here to replace it, and with James Gunn at its helm is attempting to finally give us a worthy competitor to Marvel's quasi-monopoly on live-action comic book productions. To spearhead the DC Universe, Superman was released to theaters in July of 2025, written and directed by James Gunn himself. The general reception to the film has been overwhelmingly positive, and for the life of me, I couldn't tell you why. Now, I'm not saying that Superman was dreadful, but rather simply alright, decent at most. Now, of course, there are plenty of things I liked about it and that I thought were really quite well done. But what has bothered me the most about the online discussion surrounding the film is people's insistence on the film being comic book accurate. While that may be the case, it simply doesn't contribute to a movie's quality, not to mention that not every comic book storyline is good in the first place. Remember when everyone was talking about how much better The Boys TV show was than the source material on which it was based? I also enjoyed the comic book reminiscent tone of the film, just as I enjoyed the darker and more grounded tones in Zack Snyder's interpretation of the character. It's just a stylistic choice that doesn't have any bearing on whether the end product is good or bad. Praising James Gunn for making a light-hearted, colourful, comic book-feeling film is just as short-sighted as praising Snyder for making a gritty, dark, dramatic adaptation with a lot of destruction. That's literally every Zack Snyder movie, and this is literally every James Gunn movie. People don't want to acknowledge that there is still nuance that divides colourful, comic book-accurate movies into better and worse ones. So, what did this film get right and what did it get wrong? Firstly, I think Lex Luthor's characterization was alright. They nailed his motivations of wanting to discredit Superman and make him hated in the eyes of the public. I also like that he has direct involvement in the government. But for a smart character, his plan is kind of stupid. Does he expect that no one ever notices the drones flying around the Engineer and Ultraman? Clark could just instantly destroy them all with his heat vision, and Lex has absolutely no backup for when that inevitably happens. Also, if you can clone Superman and control the clones, why do you only use one clone to fight him? The cast is far too large for a solo film. There's no reason to introduce the Justice Gang when you only need Mr. Terrific anyway. They should have left Hawkgirl and Guy Gardner out and made it so Superman actually saves the people in Jahanpur in the end instead of them. Eve, Joey and the Engineer also didn't really need to be there and just exist because Gunn couldn't figure out how else to get the plot to move forward. The acting and the casting are both good. I was really not expecting to like David Corenswet as Clark Kent as much as I did. The heart-to-heart scene between Clark and his father is an absolute highlight with incredible acting from both Pruitt Taylor Vince and Corenswet. Some of the fight scenes are also great and exactly as creative as we've come to expect from James Gunn. Some others are not. I want to also mention that I personally had no problem with the change to Superman's backstory when it comes to Jor-El and Lara. I enjoyed the portrayal of Superman as a good-at-heart, innocent but slightly naive hero who wants to save everyone. That's what Superman should be. But how can you justify him saving a squirrel but then killing Ultraman without caring whatsoever? Arguably the worst part of the film is how Superman is basically passive throughout the entire runtime and most of the heavy lifting is done by what should be side characters. Clark loses to the Hammer of Baravia. He then relies on Krypto to bring him to the Fortress of Solitude. He then relies on the Superman bots to heal him. Mr. Terrific defeats the giant kaiju with his bombs, and while the Justice Gang fight against the Imp, Clark does nothing. Mr. Terrific has to save Clark when he's locked up. Clark also has to rely on Elemental Man to get him out of their cell. Mr. Terrific closes the rift in the end. Jimmy and Lois take down Lex Luthor, the Justice Gang fight the Baravian forces, and Hawkgirl kills the Baravian president. There is also no payoff of Clark saving the Jahanpurians in the end, who have been begging for him to save them. Not to mention that Mr. Terrific has the best fight scene in a Superman movie. The dialogue and humor also feel either bad or generic for a modern superhero movie depending on the scene, and make it hard to take the film seriously. The reason that this style of writing worked for the Guardians films is because they're basically ensemble comedies all throughout and never try to make themselves feel too important. The result here, however, is emotional detachment from an otherwise emotional movie. What I find to be especially appalling is seeing people claim that Superman is a fresh take on the superhero genre. Just no, this is the exact same thing we've been seeing from Marvel for the past decade. From the dialogue to the lack of focus to the overdone CGI, everything feels predictable and standardized, ultimately resulting in just another mediocre comic book flick. The entire response to the film reminded me of this terrible, dumb scene where Lex shows Clark his mind-controlled monkeys, but instead of writing hate comments, they're tasked with glazing this movie for all of eternity. To be quite frank, Superman was a bit of a disappointment. The visuals were just okay, even the music was not as good as I expected from Gunn, and as a huge DC fan has me feeling cautious for what's to come. I think the best course of action is to wait and see how the supposedly darker DCU movies like Clayface and Swamp Thing turn out to be. I also can't help but fear that putting James Gunn in charge of the DCU might eventually result in an equally slop-ridden, unfunny garbage dump of a cinematic universe as Marvel's has turned out to be. At least the DCEU tried to go into a different direction with the genre, while this is just same old, same old. Once again, I just don't understand why people are defending this project in particular like their lives depend on it, when it's just the average, inside-of-the-box thinking, decent at best, Phase 4 MCU-adjacent product. Ultimately, I didn't hate Superman at all. In fact, I didn't feel strongly about it whatsoever. And I'm also not trying to tell people what they get to enjoy and what they don't. If you love this movie, then that's great. But at some point you have to look at the things you love and ask whether there is actual merit behind them that has been earned for you to feel this way. That's it from me. Have a pleasant rest of your day.